But we'll be in Hebrews 11 this evening, verses 8 through 10. And you can find that on page 1195 in your pew Bible. And I'd encourage you to keep Hebrews 11 and 12 open in front of you, because we'll jump around to a couple of other passages as well in Hebrews 11 and 12. Let's give our attention to the reading of God's Word. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Would you pray with me? Father, may these words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. In Jesus' name, amen. Have you ever received one of those robocalls, the kind promising you a free cruise, or maybe a strange email from a Nigerian prince who's been exiled from his kingdom, asking you to send him $300 for a plane ticket? In exchange, he'll send you a fortune. You know, there's a saying for promises like these. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. In our text this evening, we find described the response of a man named Abraham to a promise. A promise that when you hear it, it sounds almost too good to be true. We read of this promise more fully in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Chapter 12 of Genesis lays out these two main promises of God to Abraham: land and blessing. God promised Abraham and his descendants the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, that they would possess, that God would dwell within as their God. And God promised them also blessing. He promised to bless Abraham and to make him into a great nation, and in him to bless all nations. How did Abraham respond to this promise? Did he say, "This is ridiculous, it's too good to be true"? No, it says in verse 8 that he responded by faith. He believed it. He believed this ridiculous promise. And not only did he believe it, he responded to it. This promise that God made to Abraham, it's our promise too, by faith in Jesus Christ. By faith in Jesus Christ, we too receive promises of land and blessing. We receive the promise of a homeland, the city of God, heaven, which Jesus has promised to return and bring with him. It's a new Eden where we will dwell with God forever. And we have received promises of blessing as well, where in Jesus Christ we are blessed with the forgiveness of our sins, right relationship with God, and the renewal and restoration of all things in Christ. And just like God's promise to Abraham, this promise demands a response. So the question we're going to answer this evening is, what does it look like to respond to the promise of God by faith? This is an important question. As we approach a new year of life and ministry as a church family, what does it look like for us to live in response to the gracious promises of God to us in Christ? Our text answers this question by showing us three responses: obeying, dwelling, and looking. Responding to the promise of God by faith looks like obeying, dwelling, and looking. So first, obeying. If you look back at verse 8 with me, it says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place he was to receive as an inheritance." This word here, called, is a word that's filled with theological significance in the Bible. Those who are called are the beneficiaries of the undeserved mercy and grace of God. They are called out of the slavery of sin and death and into right relationship with God. And all of this happens not because of anything special in them, not because of their merit or performance, but because of the gracious purposes of a loving God. So before we begin talking about obedience, we need to clarify something very important. That Abraham was not called because of something special about him. He was called because God chose to call him. He was called because of the gracious purposes of a loving God. And he was called to receive an inheritance. An inheritance is something that is received and not achieved. This means that even though Abraham is the subject of these three verses, God is the author and the main actor of the story. So before we begin talking about obedience, we need to understand that obedience is always in response to the gracious calling of God. Obedience is always in response to the gracious calling of God, which is a calling to receive an inheritance that He has won for us. So this is the why of obeying. We always obey in response to God's gracious calling. But what does it actually look like to obey? Well, in Genesis 12, it says that God called Abraham out from the nations and blessed him with an inheritance so that in him all the families of the earth would be blessed. Do you see what's happening here? God is calling Abraham out from the nations and calling him to participate in God's story of redemption. And what is the story of redemption? It's the gospel. It's the good news that ever since Eden, ever since Adam failed to be who he was meant to be in Genesis 3, God has been in the process of calling to himself a people through whom he would redeem and restore all things to the way that they'd always been meant to be. Through Abraham, he raised up a people to be a light to the nations. And through the line of Abraham, he raised up Jesus Christ, the God-man, the light to the nations. And through Jesus Christ, he raised up a church to be a light to the nations, to show the world that heaven is breaking in. So what does this tell us about obedience? It tells us that obedience ultimately looks like participating in the story of redemption that God is writing in this world. God calls all of us out of the story that we are in and calls us to participate in the story that He is writing in this world. This is what obedience looks like. We turn from the stories of this world, stories that always promise more and more and deliver less and less. And we give our lives to this story. We give our lives to the gospel. As you and your family approach this new year, I would encourage you to ask yourself this question. Is God's story of redemption, is the gospel story the story that is captivating you and motivating the way you live your life? Have you built your life around the principle that you exist to tell this story to the world? If there were only one thing I could ask of you as your pastor in this new year, as we approach a new year of ministry together, it would be that you would not just hear the gospel story abstractly, but that you would begin to see the gospel story as your story. That the gospel story would shape your life. Well, what does this look like? How do you participate in God's story of redemption? Well, what participation looks like is that everything in your life becomes an instrument to tell this story to the world. Your time becomes an instrument to tell this story to the world. Your talents, your gifts become an instrument to tell this story to the world. Your treasure, your money becomes an instrument to tell this story to the world. And these three things converge and are used to tell this story to the world primarily through God's gathered people, through His church. God raised up a nation, Israel, to be a light to the nations, and now in Christ He's raised up a church to be a light to the nations. So participating in God's story of redemption looks like using your time, talents, and treasure to build up His church so that we can tell this story to the world. Something else to note as we look at verse 8 is that in our participation in the story of redemption, we are not guaranteed the full knowledge of how our participation will pay off in the short term. It says that he, meaning Abraham, went out not knowing where he was going. Abraham set out to an unknown land because he was responding in faith to the promise of God. He didn't know how or when he would come to possess the land. He didn't know how his obedience would impact him financially. He didn't know how God was going to provide the offspring He promised. He set off on this journey, and Sarah was still barren. On the road of obedience, we walk by faith and not by sight. By faith, we give up the right to know exactly how each act of obedience will pay off in the short term. Now, this looks like foolishness to the world. The world says, why would you trust in the invisible promises of a God you can't see? Why would you trust in the invisible promises of God over and against what you can see with your own two eyes? Why would you sacrifice your money, your time, your gifts, your home, your family to serve a God you can't see and who doesn't even show you how your obedience will pay off in the short term? Because we don't look to what is seen. Those who look to what is seen trade ultimate assurance for immediate assurance. It's the story of the garden all over again, where sin caused Adam and Eve to trade the ultimate assurance of eternal life and intimacy with God for the momentary pleasure of what they could taste and see. So why do we live by faith and not by sight, even though this looks like foolishness to the world? Because the ultimate assurance of the promise of God is so much more valuable than any immediate assurances offered by the world. We're going into a bit of an uncertain season as a church. Perhaps that's a bit of an understatement. We're going into an uncertain season. But we go forward in faith. We go forward in dependence on the promise of God. God has been faithful to His church for centuries. And He will continue to be faithful to us. As we continue to go into this next year, as the people of God, we do so as those called to receive an inheritance by participating in God's story of redemption, even though we may not know where we're going. We go forward in faith. So what does it look like to respond to the promise of God by faith? First, obeying. Second, dwelling. If you look back at verse 9 with me, it says, by faith, he, meaning Abraham, went out to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. Now, this verse speaks to the fact that Abraham dwelled in the land that God promised him. But the emphasis, the weight of this verse is on the manner of Abraham's dwelling, how he dwelled. The word live used here is a word with a very specific meaning. It means to dwell as a sojourner. A sojourner or a pilgrim is somebody who lives in a place temporarily. This verse also says that Abraham lived as a foreigner, dwelling in tents. The author of Hebrews here is really emphasizing the fact that the manner in which Abraham lived in this land that was promised to him was as a sojourner. He was not an entrenched citizen. A citizen is someone who finds their welfare in the land in which they dwell. A sojourner finds their welfare in a land separate from the land in which they dwell. And why does this matter? It matters because the way that we live in this world, in response to the promise of God, reveals where we have put our hope. It reveals where we find our welfare. Abraham lived in the tension of being in the promised land and yet not possessing the promised land. This is the tension of the already but the not yet. See, at this point in Abraham's life, God's promise had already been fulfilled. He was indeed living in the land that God promised to him. But God had not yet fully given that land to him and his ancestors. In fact, the Israelites would not come to fully possess the land of Israel for almost 1,000 years, to the time of David. How was Abraham able to live in this tension? Because he knew that Canaan was a temporary land that served to point forward and upward to an even better land. This is why he was able to dwell as a sojourner, living his entire life in tents. Hope in the eternal promises of God enable Abraham to accept the reality that everything in this world is trying to deny. This life is temporary. It's passing away. You and I are living in the already, but the not yet. Christ has already come. Redemption has been won. But He has not yet returned to bring His kingdom fully. We are living in the tension of the temporary. And the temptation is for us to try to resolve this tension by treating this temporary land like a permanent dwelling. Everything in this world, everything in this culture is trying to sell you the fact that this world is where you should put your hope. The American dream is trying to sell you the fact that in order to live well in this land, you need to be an entrenched citizen. You need to build your kingdom here. And I'm here this evening to tell you not to buy it. Do not buy it. This world is not the promised land. America, as good as it is not the promised land. And if Abraham dwelled as a sojourner in the promised land, how much more should we dwell as sojourners in this land? Why? Because the land that we hope in, the land that we find our welfare in, it's not this land. A sojourner holds loosely to the things of this world and clings tightly to the world to come, the world that's promised by God. I've learned a lot of things as a parent, but I think one of the most important things that I have learned is that it is okay to Google your child's behavior every once in a while. It's okay. One of the things I've Googled over the years is the phenomenon I like to call the dinner time wiggles. It's that thing where your child is somehow unable to sit still in their chair at dinner time. And so instead they just wiggle all over the place and they can't sit still. Eventually I thought there has to be a reason for this that doesn't involve my parenting. And so I found myself typing into Google, why won't my child sit still in their chair? And do you know what? I actually found a scientific reason in an article posted by a pediatric occupational therapist. The reason is that even though a chair is perfectly able to support a child, small children don't like the sensation of their feet dangling. It's uncomfortable to them. So what they try to do to alleviate the discomfort is half sit in the chair with one foot on the ground, or to wiggle all over the place until they can get comfortable. And the irony is that they never get comfortable because the wiggling and the half-sitting is just as uncomfortable as sitting in the chair. You and I are living in an uncomfortable tension. The tension of the already, but the not yet. And if we are honest with ourselves, this tension feels very uncomfortable. And for those of us experiencing suffering and hardship, the tension is especially real and especially painful. It can feel sometimes like we are just dangling out there in eternity. And so the temptation for us is to just stick one foot out and begin to rest functionally on the things of this world. Money, success, power, family. To begin to rest functionally on the things of this world, all while religiously pretending to rest on the promise of God. And the signs of this are prevalent in the American church. Prayerlessness, independence, love of comfort. When we half rest on the promises of God, what we're trying to do is negotiate a deal where we can get the promise, but not have to feel any pain. What we're trying to do is wiggle around the reality of the discomfort that comes with living in the tension of the temporary. And living like this is exhausting, isn't it? We wear ourselves out trying to make this temporary tent feel like a permanent dwelling. Here's the good news. For those of us worn out from trying to half sit on the promises of God, Jesus says, "Come to me. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give to you rest." What we need to understand is that the unease of this life is exactly what God intends to use to press us into deeper reliance on Him and on His promises. The Apostle Paul puts it this way in 2 Corinthians 5, 17 and 18. "For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." So how do we respond to the promise of God? By faith. First, obeying. Second, dwelling. And third, looking. Look at verse 10. It says, "For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God." This word, looking, it means to expect with absolute confidence. The motivation for Abraham's endurance on the road of faith was an ongoing expectation, an absolute confidence in the coming city of God. This expectation is explained further in verses 13 through 16 of chapter 11, if you want to look down there for me. Verses 13 through 16 of chapter 11 explains, "These all died in their faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared for them a city." This is the only reason Abraham was able to live as a sojourner in the land of promise, because he was looking forward with absolute confidence to a better city, a city God had prepared for him. He knew that God wasn't holding out on him. God had something so much better in store. And Abraham had absolute confidence in that. He bet his life on that. Abraham, even though he never lived to see the promise fulfilled to him, he looked forward to, with absolute certainty, the heavenly city that God had prepared for him. This is what I want you to hear. Everybody in this world is looking to something. Everybody is betting their life on something. And either you are living your life having acknowledged that you are a stranger and exile on earth, seeking a homeland, looking to the city of God, or you are betting your life on the fact that this earthly city is all that there is. And what we look to is determined primarily by where we think we're going to find life. Ultimately, we either believe that life is found in eternity or life is found in the temporary. If you're here this evening and you're looking to the things of this world for life, if you're looking to your family, your marriage, your children, your possession, some future happiness for life, I want you to hear that there is something so much better. There is a better city, a heavenly city, a city that you were made for, a city of which everything good in this life, everything you hold dear, is but a shadow and a foretaste. It's a city where life is. Back where I'm from in Florida, we have this place, maybe you've heard of it, Disney World. The most magical place on earth. Maybe you've been there. When you finally make it to Disney World, when you make it through all the lines and all the hubbub to finally get into the park, what's one of the first things you see? You see the gift shop. Or more accurately, you probably see a dozen gift shops. I want you to think about how ridiculous it would be to travel all the way down to Disney World, to pay for a ticket, to make it all the way into the park, walk into the gift shop, and stay there for your entire vacation. You spend your entire vacation playing with all the toys in the gift shop, never even considering the rest of the park. There's something so much better right outside the door. And there you are playing with that thing that turns a small penny into a big penny all day long. It's ridiculous. Friends, this world, this city is just a hint. It is just a glimpse of the city that awaits us. It is tragic for us to spend our lives looking to a city that is passing away and that is not even worth comparing to the city that is coming. And what is the city that is coming? We have a beautiful description of it in chapter 12, 22 through 24. If you look over there with me, Hebrews 12, 22 through 24. It says, "But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." We're looking to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, the story of redemption we were talking about earlier. This is the point of it all. God is bringing His people to a place where He will dwell with them forever. This is what Abraham hoped in. He didn't want a temporary city. He wanted the city where God is, a city built by God, as it says in this passage, a city that has foundations. And how may we come to this city? Because we have come to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that He has shed for us. We can look to the city of God because Jesus has secured this city for us, and we're looking to Him. So if you're here this evening and you're thinking perhaps that there is no place for you in the city of God because of the sin in your life, because of the shame that you feel, I want you to hear that God has made a way for you in Jesus Christ. If you believe in Him and trust in Him, you will be saved. Our groom is waiting for us in the city that He has won for us by His blood. And He is coming soon to bring this city with Him. This promise in this passage, this promise that seems too good to be true, it's true. And it's true because of Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters, as we enter into a new year of ministry together, fix this truth in your mind. There is a better city. It's coming. We are sojourners in this world, and heaven is our home. God isn't holding out on us. There's a better city that you were made for, that Christ won for you by His blood. Live your life looking to that city. Live your life looking in eager expectation to your coming Savior, Jesus Christ. Live by faith in Jesus Christ so that His life, death, and resurrection would be manifested in your life. Walk in the footsteps of Christ. You see, Jesus is the truer and better Abraham who obeyed for us. He left His heavenly country and entered into our world to win for us our inheritance. Jesus dwelled as a sojourner in a foreign land. It says in the Gospel of Luke that foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head. Think of it. The King of the universe lived the life of a vagabond. The one who had everything lived as though he had nothing. Our Savior was born in a place not worthy of Him, lived in a world not worthy of Him, and He died the death that we are worthy of. Why did He do it? Because He was looking to the city of God, the heavenly Jerusalem, the city that He has won for us. Amen. Let's pray. Oh, Father, we are thankful that before the foundations of the world, You have prepared for us a city, a homeland, where we will dwell with You forever. Father, help us to see the supreme value of the city that is coming, and would that empower us to dwell as sojourners in this land, holding loosely to the things of this world while clinging tightly to the things to come. And Jesus, we acknowledge that it is in You alone that our hope is found. Help us by Your Spirit to live as participants in the story of redemption that You are writing in this world. And as we come now to celebrate the Lord's Supper together, we look forward to the day when we will feast with You in the new heavens and the new earth, when we will not just commune with You spiritually, but we will see You face to face. Ready our hearts now, Father, to receive this sacrament by faith. In Jesus' name, amen.